Hawatlo, aloha, howdy. Welcome back to day 2 of Decolonizing Economics from Earth Day to May Day. My name is David Cobb. I use he, him pronouns. I'm speaking to you from unceded Wiyot ancestral territory in what is now called Humboldt County, far northern California. Eureka, Jarajiji. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the session on the People's Network for Land and Liberation. I want to take this moment to thank KMUD Community Radio Station, who is simulcasting this session and, in fact, most of this summit live. So shout out to KMUD. I also want to thank Free Speech TV, who is showing this after the fact, most of the sessions. I want to let you know that we are, for those participating live, actively using the chat and a Padlet. If you follow the chat, you can get integrated into both of those resources as we go forward. Before we jump right into this session, I want to say a word about what we mean by decolonization, and specifically decolonizing economics. This is the 5th annual summit. It's always been a post-capitalist summit, but at the very first session, Professor Kutcha Rising Baldy of the Native American Studies Department at Cal Poly Humboldt was a keynote speaker and really challenged us to think more deeply about this topic. And it is our effort to name this decolonizing economics as an explicit challenge to ourselves and participants to center indigenous wisdom, perspective, and knowledge. For us, and a hat tip to so many others, decolonization is not merely a metaphor. It is the path towards a just social, political, and economic system. A call to decolonizing economics acknowledges that in order to build the movement for reparative restorative justice, we need to understand the extent to which colonization has influenced and continues to influence our modern economy. This summit itself aims to demonstrate real solutions to heal the land, to heal the people, and to heal ourselves through education, both of ourselves and attendees, about our current economic systems, the failings that happen when you put people or put profit over people, and the ways in which groups around the world are working towards a completely new system. So it is with that in mind that I want to welcome the representatives from the People's Network for Land and Liberation. And we have a presentation that I'm going to walk through, and I'll ask Miki'ala to please start that presentation, and folks will come up and speak about each of these nodes. But the People's Network for Land and Liberation is a program to win a new world. It is explicit and clear and about an orientation. We recognize that we are in a polycentric crisis between an economic collapse, an ecological collapse, and rising fascism, white supremacy, etc., that we know that we need a completely new system. Mainstream institutions and organizations are not solving the problems. In fact, they're not designed to solve the problems of white supremacy, capitalism, settler colonialism, or heteropatriarchy, but even more, they can't solve the basic problems of feeding and clothing people. Around the world, people are creating new ways of living within their communities, new ways of relating to each other. I should say, returning to the old ways of relating to each other and of the land. Again, to push myself to understand and remember that this is about balance. This is about returning to the balance that existed before settler colonialism, before heteropatriarchy, before white supremacy. There was a time when all humans lived in right relation, and we are striving at the People's Network for Land and Liberation to not only get back to that, but to use technology appropriately to live a new life. To be blunt, the People's Network for Land and Liberation is an emerging BIPOC-led consortium of organizations, 6 across the country, that share a vision for a new world. Each of these organizations in their communities works to build cooperative, regenerative, and balanced systems. Together, the network ties together individual efforts, shares information and techniques, and inspires others. Nicola, if you could continue to scroll. And there is the beautiful People's Network for Land and Liberation logo and a mission statement that I want to read out loud for those of you who may not be viewing this screen. The mission of the People's Network for Land and Liberation is to decommodify the land, to reestablish right relationship with the earth and all our relations and relatives. We aim to advance democratic ownership of the means of production and liberatory social relationships. We are committed to building communities that regenerate the Earth's living ecosystems. The People's Network for Land and Liberation consists of autonomous organizations, 6 of them, that share best practices and opportunities to allow each entity to fulfill its own organizational mission. Could you continue to slide, please? The shared program of the People's Network for Land and Liberation, at its core, if you'd slide, through an ongoing conversation, members of the network have found 5 key strategies for shifting from extractive systems to communities that are collectively created, self-sufficient, and resilient. The first part is to decommodify the land using community land trusts for community-owned affordable housing in perpetuity and food production using a food sovereignty framework, sometimes known as permaculture or indigenous food production and distribution. The second is to establish community production employing digital fabrication technologies for decentralized manufacturing to empower local communities to create goods and services collaboratively and sustainably. The third program is to incubate an ecosystem of worker-owned cooperatives that go beyond co-ops for the sake of co-ops, but create profitable and vibrant local supply and value chains. The fourth part of our program is to incorporate an internal self-education program that engages folks to foster critical thinking, dialogue, and empowerment to learn and implement our transformational and liberatory program. The fifth, to infuse art and culture activities in everything that we do. Yes, this means poems and songs and making things beautiful, but it goes deeper. That is to organize according to the adage, if it isn't soulful, it isn't strategic. We know the importance of art as a medium by which we inspire ourselves and one another. So the People's Network for Land and Liberation has these 6 organizations, each with a different perspective on how this actually looks in the real world. This is not merely a theoretical framework, but we are presenting to you 6 organizations that are working together, using best practices, using sociocracy, using cutting-edge new ways of communicating and iterative practices, lean and agile technologies to learn from each other, to share with each other. We use the solidarity economy framework clearly and explicitly. We are rooted in the idea of a solidarity economy with the understanding that it is an explicit post-capitalist framework that connects both practices and rooted in the solidarity economy values of solidarity, participatory democracy, equity across all dimensions, race, gender, sexual orientation, genuine sustainability and interconnectedness, living in harmony with the people and the planet, and importantly, a commitment to pluralism, an understanding that this is not a one-size-fits-all. It's a world, with a hat tip to the Zapatistas, it is a world in which many worlds fit. Taken together, the solidarity economy expresses a vision, framework, and a global movement for a post-capitalist society grounded in real-world practices. We invite you to learn more about the Solidarity Economy Network at the US Solidarity Economy Network.org. But for now, I want to take you on a quick tour of the People's Network for Land and Liberation and allow each of the nodes, that we call them. But take a look. You'll see Native Roots Network. You'll see Incite Focus in Idlewild, also known as Black Eden. We'll hear from Cooperation Vermont, Wellspring in Western Massachusetts, Community Movement Builders in Atlanta, Georgia, and Cooperation Jackson in Jackson, Mississippi. I'll take this moment to say that our dear comrade Kali Akuno has suffered a health issue and is now getting treatment. We think everything is okay, but Edget Betru will step in to give that part of the presentation. So keep sliding, please. Before we go into, oh, yes, so the very first one is Community Movement Builders in Atlanta, Georgia. Edget? Edget, you're on mute if you're trying to speak to us. Perhaps she's been taken away, so let's slide past Community Movement Builders, and we'll go to our next place, which is Cooperation Jackson. And unfortunately, we know Edget is not with us, so we'll slide right past and go into Cooperation Vermont. And I'll turn this over to Michelle Eddleman McCormick.
Hi, folks. Michelle Eddleman McCormick here. Use she, her pronouns. I'm the director and lead organizer of Cooperation Vermont and the Cooperation Vermont Community Land Trust. I'm also the general manager of our flagship project, the Marshfield Village Store, which was the first thing that we worked to decommodify. Was an historic and very central and important building in our community, the Marshfield Village Store, and we converted the business to a worker-owned cooperative. And with that, I am going to share my screen. Everyone's seeing that, I'm assuming. And so the mission of Cooperation Vermont is to build thriving.
Actually, not yet, Michelle. Let me stop share and go ahead and retry.
Okay, let's do that again. All right. How about now?
There you go.
Yay. Okay. So the mission of Cooperation Vermont is to build thriving community, economic, and environmental democracy. And the vision is that by organizing with local communities and existing efforts in, throughout the state, because there are a lot of things that are going on in Vermont. Cooperation Vermont is preparing for the continued deterioration of economic and environmental conditions and for the inevitability of displaced peoples. The vision is to shift away from extractive systems of economic development and through a, quote, just transition, collectively create self-sufficient, resilient communities with thriving, ecologically sustainable economies. And see if I can navigate this. There we go. Good times, good enough. So I guess with the few minutes that I have, I will focus on the why of Cooperation Vermont. In many ways, you know, Cooperation Vermont is one of the nodes of the People's Network for Land and Liberation. And in other ways, it's kind of a baby project of, it's very new in its inception. It's only about 2.5 years, maybe 3 years in total formation. That's not helpful. And it is an intentionally seeded project in this specific bioregion, in light of the realities of both, you know, climate and political change in the U.S. and where we believe, and many others, that this particular bioregion is going to be more climate resilient. And I would just emphasize that it doesn't mean that there aren't going to be impacts. We had some serious flooding here in our community and throughout central Vermont this past summer. So just in the same way that there is no safe space in empire, there is no safe space in climate change either. But you know, this area is projected to be more resilient. And so the idea is that, you know, if we need a fruit bearing tree in 20 years, we need to be planting seeds today. And the reality is that there are many places, particularly along the Gulf South, places where, you know, Cooperation Jackson are based, places where my hometown community is based, that might quite literally be underwater by the time our children are having children. And what are we doing today to help prepare for that that future? And then even before then, with the political shifts in the country, you know, political migration may be even sooner. So with that, I just want to go ahead and kind of leapfrog over to our biggest project at the moment is many folks may or maybe not have heard that Goddard College, which is right here in the town right next to us, has announced that it is closing and is selling its physical campus. And we've been working really hard to make a move to purchase the physical campus of Goddard College and to bring it into the Cooperation Vermont Community Land Trust, and to create a concept, you know, that I don't think has been done in the country, to the best of my knowledge, when we've got colleges that are closing now at a rate of 1 per week, which is still astonishing every time I have to say it. You know, how do we, as both movement and as local community, create a pathway forward in those moments? And our working concept is to create a, quote, just transition campus, where it's still a place where there's learning and experimentation and a place to really build community resilience. And, you know, currently there are a couple of organizations, a school and an herbalism school, that are on the campus. And our local community radio is actually there as well. And to build on that, continue to invite additional community partners, all of which are working on things that are related to a just transition. They fall under that umbrella, but most of us, many of us, can only work on particular threads. And the idea is that by bringing everybody together in one specific place and being very intentional about pulling those threads together and trying to weave them into a fabric that looks like, you know, demonstrations of next systems economy, and for building community resilience, and how do we demonstrate a pathway forward by collaboration and, you know, bringing these organizations and organizing projects together to really do that work intentionally. So on our end, which is how we'd ended up in conversation with Goddard originally, was we were looking for space to build out our community production center for which Blair will tell you much more about, but in the same, you know, line and vision of the work that is being done over at Incite Focus, to do that here in central Vermont as you know, a way to relocalize and democratize production. And in our case, really being tooled up to be able to start developing some net zero affordable housing. So it's a big, you know, giant project and an undertaking that we were really on the cusp of, because, you know, we're movement people that are having to move at the real estate, at the pace of real estate, which, you know, we move at the pace of trust and capacity within the movement, and real estate just moves at the pace of capital, which usually we find ourselves being railroaded over. Ooh, interesting analogy now that I think about it. But that's where we are. So we're deep in the middle of a fundraising and political campaign to try and win that. And yeah, I don't know if I've gone 10 minutes, or I'm happy to pass it to the next node.
Okay, let's do that. So Edget, are you in a position to speak to community movement builders now?
Yes, I am.
Fantastic. Let's spotlight my dear friend and comrade Edget Betru of Community Movement Builders.
So So Community Movement Builders is a member-based collective of Black people creating or developing sustainable, self-determining communities through cooperative economics, collective community organizing. We ground our work in the principles of self-determination, sustainability, the leadership of the people, and solidarity with all oppressed people. And we are, like the other nodes in the PNLL network, grounded in both a community and a land base, and are working to develop a land trust to address the lack of housing in our communities, but also to decommodify the land. And that's a great point of connection for us in joining with the network. But we are also doing things like developing workers' cooperatives, and trying to, and having a garden where we grow food. So trying to develop our production capacity. And we're hoping to learn more from Incite Focus so we can enhance that even further and build on that. We do organizing as well, kind of the fight back component, in addition to the building of our kind of liberated zone, which is how we frame our work. So the fights have been generally here around Cobb City. Now that's happening all over. So we have 6 chapters right now, and the Atlanta and Dallas chapter are both have been organizing to stop the development of Cobb City, which by now I'm sure everybody knows is, the police training facilities. But our other chapters are engaged in other work. Right now, our LA chapter is involved in the student encampment at UCLA. So that's kind of the build component of our work. I didn't hear all of the presentation on the network, so I wanted to try to make those connections, but I would like to hear more from the other nodes if they haven't gone yet, so that I could better connect the issues.
Absolutely, Edget. So we heard from Cooperation Vermont, and now we'll go back to the presentation. Nicola, thank you so much. We're juggling a few things, but this is how we do, right? So slide down, Nicola, and the next node was going to be Cooperation Jackson. I'm wondering, Edget, would you like us to go past this one and come back, or can you talk about Cooperation Jackson? I know that you were part of the early seeding of Cooperation Jackson, and since Kali Akuno is not with us.
Yes. Okay. I'm sure most people here know a lot about Cooperation Jackson already, so I will start, and others can add if there are things that I'm forgetting or missing. Cooperation Jackson grew out of something called the Jackson-Cush Plan, which was developed by folks in the New African Peoples Organization and the Malcolm X grassroots movement, which is connected, or an outgrowth of work from back in the 70s, the Republic of New Africa, which identified the area, particularly around the Delta, as a place where there were the most contiguous counties that had majority Black populations. And so the idea was to concentrate our organizing work there, and through running folks for local office, building cooperative enterprises, amassing a land trust that we can then use for housing and production, create self-determination within a particular zone. So they have been, I believe today is actually their 10th year anniversary. So happy anniversary, Cooperation Jackson. The idea, of course, of building cooperation cooperatives as has existed in other places, and also now has become more popular and is being utilized more as a means of building our movement capacity and the capacity of the communities in which we work in. They also have a production center, actually similar to Incite Focus, and they are working on building housing using the makers facilities, and that would be on the land trust. Is there, Michelle or David, can you add?
Yes, let me put a little details to that fantastic big picture, Edget, for Cooperation Jackson. Because Cooperation Jackson already owns 52 properties outright, unencumbered by debt. They own it free and clear. I'm going to say this again. A radical organization rooted deeply in the community with an explicit anti-racist, explicitly feminist, explicitly post-capitalist framework owns 52 properties. 6 of those properties are single-family homes that are already operating as housing cooperatives and giving people a place to live. 4 of those are single-family properties with structures that are existing but need renovation and rehabilitation that are underway. Another 10 are undeveloped parcels that are being farmed using agroecology indigenous practices. And who's farming it? The Freedom Farms worker-owned cooperative. Other of those parcels are undeveloped and are in the process of soil remediation, literally using natural techniques to regenerate the soil. But wait, there's more, because 6 of those sites are commercial sites. Edget mentioned the first, the Bagaloon Community Center, which is a 6,000 square foot community center that already operates as a space for organizing, arts and culture program, etc. The second is the Community Production Center with multiple 3D printers, laser cutters, and other digital fabrication tools and equipment. The third is a 10,000 square foot building that is being repurposed to serve as a site for recycling, once again, owned by a worker-owned cooperative. The fourth is the Ida B. Wells Strip Center. It's a 6-unit strip center, only a block away from their community center and their community production center, that will house the People's Grocery Store, which will be owned and operated, you guessed it, as a worker-owner cooperative. They also have 8 acres ready for development as a self-sufficient off-the-grid eco-village with plans for 32 units of communal living, and then another acre that is being developed or currently already used as a commercial composting site. And there are 5 functioning worker-owned cooperatives, a catering co-op, Freedom Farms I already mentioned, a Green Team Landscaping, and a Zero Waste Composting Workers Co-op, and the Community Production Center also operates as a workers-owned co-op. So when I say that Cooperation Jackson is at the tip of the spear on using this process to democratize the economy, decommodify the land, it's not hyperbole. It's actually happening. And pardon me, Nicola, could you please continue the screen share scroll? We've already done Cooperation Vermont. We're going to go now to Incite Focus and turn it over to our dear friend and leader of the digital fabrication world, Blair Evans. Blair?
Hi, everybody. Good to be here with you. I guess I'm gonna riff off of what kind of has happened a little bit and kind of break this into three quick sections. One is to kind of loop through the 5 points of PNLL and relate what we're doing to those points. Another is to kind of indicate some of the foundational work we're doing to allow us to actually manifest that. And then we may talk a little bit on future kind of progress in the third component. So I guess to begin with, and it's not necessary to scroll back, but of the 5 points, decommodifying land is a really critical one. We're located in Idlewild, Michigan, and we're the outlier, kind of not on a coast. We're right in the Midwest, in the middle of Michigan, in a historic community of Idlewild, Michigan, which, as David mentioned, was kind of nicknamed Black Eden, in addition to several other things over a period of time. It's a community over 100 years old that was forged during times of segregation to provide a safe space for African Americans who came north in the Great Migration and were in these red line pressure cooker environments. And so to have an opportunity to actually have outdoor space, outdoor recreation, a way to congregate and be culturally expressive, in places that weren't running contrary to allow you to do that. And so it did build up a big entertainment industry during that time period, which was the Black Eden. The world moved on from some of that. And so there's a time period that it got quiet here. My family's been coming up here since the 1920s. So we had like 5 generations here. So I'm really embedded in the place. But there's a significant intellectual cross currents in Idlewild, Michigan, of all different groups of people kind of thinking about how folks might be able to live differently. There's cooperative economics going on here in the 20s and 30s and 40s, kind of et cetera. So there are echoes here of things that happened in the past, even though people have moved to a different mindset. And so we got involved heavily about 20 years ago, and we noticed that it was starting to slide sideways. And so we have grabbed a lot of the assets that were about to be commodified and sold kind of on the speculative marketplace. So we currently are controlling 2 motels that were in the Green Book back in the day, community center. We have a 60-acre parcel that's going to be our resilience hub. We also have 6 houses on the lakes in the Idlewild area. And those are kind of in a transitional step right now, because our expertise coming into this was in making stuff. And on the built environment side, digital fabrication, we're a national training center within the Fab Academy network, which is part of the Fab Lab network. I'm one of the senior instructors in that, and we do offer training programs through diplomas in digital fabrication, but also on the natural environment, those skills that relate to actually having a sustainable long-term relationship with the land where it can provide the yields that we need to provide for ourselves, but also have the capacity for the land to regenerate itself going forward, whether you want to call that permaculture or indigenous practices or whatever. So we've kind of been working with both of those in combination. And we've done it in other places. And Cooperation Jackson, for example, was the kind of first follower on the digital fabrication side with their community production center there. But we have noticed that there's a hard ceiling when folks really figure out what it is that you're trying to do, not just train people to get jobs, but to train people to think about work differently, to train people to be able to utilize the land to develop things that are in their own best interest, as opposed to creating wealth for other people. The antibodies within the government establishments usually kind of come out and tend to squash those efforts. And so when we shifted base to Idlewild, we spent a significant amount of time working with those aspects, which I think in a former session were called formal power, dealing with the institutional mechanisms of solidifying the means to be able to create what we want. So, if you're in the agricultural area, you kind of understand that if you want to grow good crops, the first thing you have to do is grow good soil. And if you have good soil, good crops can emerge from that. So we've been doing a lot of that invisible work of creating an environment where we can be successful. And so let me point out first that in this whole digital fabrication area that we don't have time to completely unpack, we're in a time period where there's a huge transition in the ability to localize the means of production and own it in the context of communities to be able to produce the durable goods that we need and use, and to be able to customize the process that we use for doing that so they can utilize local supply chains. And so that opens up the possibility to radically rethink a lot of things and a lot of patterns that we're usually locked into, not just in food and health and wellness, but in the practical things like houses and furnitures and transportation and those kind of pieces. So we needed an authentic area to be able to not just whiteboard these things, but to be able to actually implement it and live the life. And so Idlewild is a place that we pick for that. And in the process, I have a bit of an organizing background. And so we have gone through the process of helping the community gain some agency in the levers of power that are important to folks in the community, from interacting with government to offering to help to holding them accountable, and have instituted a couple successful recall petitions, one that's gone through a successful election and the other one has an election next week, to actually shift the governing body in the township to one that's not specific to our aims, but is responsive to the community's aims overall. And so that's part of an overall effort on the municipal side, to rebuild government to be able to allow modern ways of thinking to actually exist in the township. Solidarity economy is one, and everybody in Idlewild doesn't have a solidarity economy mindset and doesn't have a mindset about commodifying the land, et cetera. However, most usual municipal policy and procedure structures, planning structures, regulatory structures with ordinances don't allow for it to exist, period, but also preclude a lot of other things from existing at the same time. So we are actually within a month of adopting a whole new ordinance system, which allows live, work, learn, play, pray kind of communities to exist in an integrated way that you need to be able to synthesize these capabilities in the same place, to be able to kind of manifest the impact on quality of life that we want, to be able to decouple having to spend most of your time working at a job that you don't like to earn money to then spend in a small fraction of your time that you have left over to create the kind of world that you're looking for. So we're looking to be able to plant both feet in the modern world building context. And so there's been about a 4-year effort to really replumb local government and extending some into county government to be able to do that. And we've been fairly successful with that. We have people who are doing good work at the staff level, at all, many levels of local township government and county government, and also township officials who can appreciate that this is one of the pathways that's viable for economic development, that's viable for creating quality of life in the community. And in most communities, that's not the case. If you're not doing high dollar development, if you're not attracting extractive capitalist enterprises that are investing a lot of money to create jobs, then immediately flow back out of the community again, but don't leave any residual benefit, then you're not doing economic development. So we've actually created the conditions where we have a wider analysis of what that could be, which then allows us to participate in the process of using, training on cooperative development as an economic development strategy. We are involved in shifting a lot of land that's in the private sector into the social space. Community land trusts are one mechanism for doing that, but there are other types of perpetual purpose trusts that kind of go along with that to, again, take it out of the speculative marketplace and put it into a context where people know that it's a long-term asset in the community, but also doing the same thing from the state sector to the social sector through things like other land trusts, but also conservation easements, for example. So we're moving to, the classic kind of triad of corporate, social, and state. We're kind of moving key assets from corporate and state into the social sector so the community has the authority and the agency to manage and have the resources to do what it needs to do in creating the quality of life that it wants. And so one of the things that empowers us to just go do something as ridiculous as that is that we actually know that if we can set the stage properly, the technology is actually there now to allow us to begin to localize all of these things. And this technology is one that's growing at an exponential rate. So 15 years from now, it'll be almost inconceivably more powerful than it is right now. But as we discuss periodically, we move at a snail's pace. Technology moves at an exponential pace. So if we know where it's going, we have to start pointing ourselves towards that future. We can't chase it and always be behind it because all sorts of unfortunate what the heck just happened. And I recognize your admonishment earlier, David, about watching my language. So what the heck just happened moments in terms of technology advanced. And so this was supposed to be democratizing, but now we have digital redlining as opposed to physical redlining. Now we have differential, law enforcement in different ways. And so unless we get ahead of this, we're always going to be wondering, why are we worse off now when all this technology came along that professed to allow us to be better. So our project is to use technology that's a little bit ahead of what's economically practical right now, so we can organize ourselves to understand how to use it, knowing that the technology is catching up with us. And so we know the trajectory of the technology. We're actually involved in pushing it in that direction. So what we're doing is working on the people part so that we're ready as the technology moves along so that we can grab it and do things with it as opposed to be bludgeoned by it. So that's my quick 50,000-foot Mach 5 flyover of kind of what we're doing in the context of Incite Focus. And what we're really interested in doing, as we started doing with Cooperation Jackson and a few other nodes mentioned that they're extremely interested in the community production aspect. If we don't understand what to do with this emerging technology, it's going to be done to us. There are already lots of plans on how to hijack these technologies in a way that will further existing mechanisms of concentrating wealth in fewer and fewer hands. Everything that has an ability to empower people, as anybody who's looked at history understands, doesn't always manifest that way. As a matter of fact, it seldom does. And unless we're extraordinarily intentional about grabbing this technology and actually learning what it's about, how we can use it. But also another unique aspect of this technology is the technology allows us to replicate the technology. So we can have a tool set that allows us to build the tool set, which allows us to then adapt those tools so that it uses materials and ethical frameworks and supply chains that we care about. So if we, with a mindset towards how the planet and relationships with each other can work more effectively, can get access to those tools on a broad basis, we can change the trajectory. If we're at the margins, that's not going to happen. And so part of our point is not just to do a good job here, but we want to integrate all these technologies, social and engineering in the same place to live with that, but to also propagate that and scale it out as aggressively as possible. So I'll pass.
Thank you, Blair. That was phenomenal. And I can't wait to bring all of our folks in from the node into a conversation about learning from one another. But I now just want to go to the fifth node is Native Roots Network that is in Redding, California, and bring Miki'ala Catalfano into the conversation. And I think Miki'ala has a slide deck that she wants to share. Miki'ala, welcome.
Aloha kako. I am Miki'ala Catalfano. Can everybody see my screen all right? Let me get that going on. There. How's that? Aloha kako. I'm Miki'ala Catalfano. She, her, Oya pronouns. I'm the co-director of Native Roots Network, and I'm located beaming into this from Puildapom in Wintu territory in the real far northern California, closer to Oregon than California. Our mission is to assert Indigenous-centered pathways to advance just and vibrant communities. And we get asked a lot, well, what does that mean? So one of the reasons why I love hanging out with this group of people is because of our shared values. And I wanted to just stop for a minute to talk about those. So for us, what we're trying to do is, when there's a lava flow and there are parts of the forest that are left in certain sections, what happens is then those areas where there are forested sections, those seeds can be blown and then begin to grow new life in areas on the lava. And that is one of the things that we think of in terms of building islands of sanity for the community and moving into the future together. And we do this through, these values of plurality. As the Zapatistas say, we work to make many worlds possible. And equity is also very important to us. Critical consciousness, we work to advance equity, particularly to those who have been harmed. Kako, all of us, that's the Hawaiian word for all of us. It's going to require all of us. And also, we hold a collective orientation where the individual is responsible to the community, and indigenous cultures are generally responsibility-based societies. And we do this work generationally. We know that some of the labor that we put in today, we may not realize in our lifetimes, but we lay the groundwork for this. And central to everything is the idea and the belief that the earth is our mother. And we honor that sanctity of her life-giving force, and we strive to do no harm beyond what we already do as humans who have impacts. I'm trying to get this to go forward. Why don't you want to go? There, okay. So many people ask us, how do we do this work? What does this have to do with solidarity economy? And what the heck is that anyway? Some of you might have been on Emily's presentation yesterday, but we put this together not just to show folks who are outside of our community, but to help articulate to our community what this means and how we're involved in it. So our work over the past 20 some odd years has definitely been involved with project work focused around culture, arts, runs, exchanges, advocacy, sacred sites, land preservation, and more recently within the last 5 years or so, real, self-provisioning. You heard Blair say that some of the things about Cooperation Jackson have really helped to guide that work. I want to share a little bit about here we are, the community. Arts has been a really big thing to help our community articulate identity, pride, and really placemaking where we live. We've networked with a number of communities, particularly Hawaii, where I'm from, and also Hopi, Arizona. You can see here. In addition to those things, advocacy, protection of sacred sites, the defense of places, sacred places like Mauna Kea, Satitla, Medicine Lake, and others. And our most recent work involves community building. So we've taken folks to visit other communities. What are they doing there? What are they doing to self-provision? What are they doing to build their workforce? What are they doing to be able to survive in what's coming in these times? We work with the youth to take them to places like Detroit. And what we're doing is our economics framework. It's our indigenous knowledge informed and valued centered holistic, very long sentence, economic development strategy to build, foster, and support a healthy, resilient, empowered community and landscape. The idea here is if we take care of the land will take care of us. Today, of all days, escrow closes on our first piece of land, and it will be the site for our indigenous-led community land trust. You heard of the different mechanisms for decommodifying land, and this is our first foray. The vision for this is to build a community resilience center and a solidarity economy hub for our community, upon which we could be growing food, propagating native plants, and building a traditional ecological knowledge land management team. And also, it would be a community center for gathering and learning. And some of the things that we hope to achieve here, we would have organic food gardens, native plant gardens. We would have cooperatives, workforce development, and, you know, digital manufacturing, micro manufacturing on site. So the translation and the articulation, why People's Network for Land and Liberation? So we've been on a trajectory for some time now. And what we found as we network with others and realize solidarity economy is actually terminology that helps describe some of the work that we've already been doing, but it helps us to articulate, provides a toolkit for the mechanisms and frameworks to apply our Indigenous values and visions into the existing Western construct. We're not changing our trajectory, we're translating it and equipping it. And we are planning for abundance. Thank you.
Thank you, Miki'ala. It's always so inspiring to see this and to watch it happen in real time, y'all. This is what I really want to underscore before we move to Wellspring. Each one of these has a theoretical framework, a shared, unapologetic vision of transforming the society, and each node is applying it in the real world, in real time, grappling with all the inherent contradictions of the people, all of the inherent contradictions of a government which claims to be democratic, but is instead plutocratic. So I just could not help but to point out that as I listen to each of my dear friends talk about what they're doing, is to underscore this is actually happening. And with that, I'm going to go back to the slide because our very next one, and in fact, the last one before we come together for a group conversation, is the Wellspring Cooperative in Springfield, Massachusetts, in the Pioneer Valley in Western Massachusetts. And I'll bring my dear friend, Emily Kawano, into the conversation. Emily?
Thank you. Yeah, it's great to be here. And one of the reasons that I'm so excited about People's Network for Land and Liberation is yes, the common values and this common strategy. And I'm going to frame it slightly differently. You know, we are at this pretty critical historic moment, this conjuncture of all these different kinds of crises. And there is really an urgent need to scale up our work, scale up, meaning get bigger, but also scale out our work. That means connecting up already existing practices. And how do we do that, right? One way of doing that is building concrete local solidarity economy ecosystems that can then provide the inspiration and the example and some model and learnings for other local ecosystems to develop. And so, you know, this group of 6 organizations, all working, maybe articulating that in slightly different ways, we're all working towards the same vision. All of these will be are great examples of local solidarity economy ecosystem. So that's so thrilling about PNLL. So to talk a little bit about Wellspring, I will say, so I'm an economist by training, and brought that training and my work in the solidarity economy sphere to Wellspring. So I'm one of the founders of Wellspring Cooperative. We're based in Springfield, Holyoke, Lower Connecticut River Valley in Western Massachusetts. And certainly as I talk about this, you know, we started with co-ops, but you'll hear how this perspective, this larger system change, solidarity economy perspective has also had quite an influence on this organization that I helped to found and I'm co-director of. So we've been around 10 years roundabout. The River Valley, called the Pioneer Valley, is very, very co-op rich. I bet you if you ran the numbers, we are probably on a per capita basis, one of the most worker co-op dense regions in the entire country. All of those, before we started working in the Lower Valley, all of those co-ops were in the Upper Valley. The Upper Valley, sometimes we affectionately call it the Happy Valley. It's also home to the 5 colleges. And you can just imagine, right? The culture, the environment, the socioeconomic, the racial diversity is quite different, right? Relatively white, well-educated, relatively affluent. So, you know, it makes a lot of sense that co-ops and community land trusts and local currencies and all that great stuff has easily taken hold in the Upper Valley. In the Lower Valley, separated by what we sometimes refer to as the Tofu Curtain, which is the Holyoke Mountain Range, where those urban areas are, which are where the concentrations of poverty, unemployment, the communities of color, the immigrant communities. In these cities, there were virtually none of that, no co-ops, none of that kind of solidarity economy practices. And so from the very get-go and the founding of Wellspring, our commitment was to say, okay, if co-ops are all that, if they're all that great, they need to be relevant in these hard scrabble struggling communities as well. So that was our commitment to start work in Springfield and Holyoke, the Lower Valley. So when we started off, our focus was really on building a network of worker-owned co-ops that would be mutually supportive, and also the nonprofit would stay connected and provide support as well. We currently have 10 co-ops in our network, and 2 of them we really built from the concept, business plan, capital raise, finding the site, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This is the picture you're looking at is one of them. That's a 1/4-acre hydroponic greenhouse. And the other one that we kind of helped to develop from the very get-go is a upholstery cooperative. So they reupholster furniture, mostly for the institutional market, hospitals and colleges. So we also started off by building on the anchor institution model. So some of you probably have heard of evergreen cooperatives in Cleveland. And so in addition to looking to build a network, similarly inspired by Mondragon, right, building a network of mutually supportive co-ops, their value added was really thinking about how do we build relationships with these anchor institutions. The anchor institutions are anchored in place like colleges and healthcare systems, hospitals. They're not going anywhere, right? Anchored in place, and they have some stake involved in seeing local surrounding communities thrive. So we built those relationships with eds and meds, mostly the hospitals and colleges. And one of the things that they were interested in was food, right? And food systems. So the greenhouse really was informed by that. An interesting thing happened as we continued to do this kind of economic development through co-ops. We realized, one, that anchor institution model is really constrictive, right? Because you are doing the research about what are anchor institution needs and purchases and what might be a viable co-op. And it there was a need to broaden into kind of bottom-up co-ops. And so we started up a co-op boot camp. We also just provide support for anybody who comes to us, any group that's interested in starting up their own co-op. So we provide that kind of support. And the third strategy of co-op development is conversions, right? Looking at existing traditional capitalist businesses where the owner is interested in selling their business to their workers. Another interesting that happened along the way was, co-ops, it's really hard work. It's really hard work, especially in these hard scrabble communities where people are facing all kinds of barriers. Sometimes there's limited formal education. It's hard to fill out the most basic kind of forms. They don't have access necessarily to those kind of that business experience. So the road of accompaniment in these communities for co-op development is very long and very slow. And it's just not for everybody, right? We wanted both to create an on-ramp, right? People who could get a taste of how to work collectively, work cooperatively. That might not be a co-op business, right? And so maybe 3 years ago, we broadened our mission to not only do the co-op development, but also to engage in solidarity economy initiatives. So one of the core, so there's a bunch, right? But the core and the thing that we're so excited about is this work, right, with PNLL. So we are looking at developing a CLT in Holyoke. There was a question in the chat about funding. We are going after an EPA climate and community change grant. That's a minimum of 10 million, a maximum of 20 million. Originally, PNLL was intending to go for that grant, right, and then split it 6 ways until we found out that we just can't do that. They wouldn't accept a multi-site application. And so we're very grateful that the other nodes felt like, Wellspring's in the best place to go for this. So we're really excited about building that out. Sorry, those twins. Building that out, if we get the grant, we would purchase what's called Gateway City Arts. It's this 4-story old mill building that has theaters and kitchens, and it already has like a maker space, co-working space, places for artists, studios. It's like a great kind of centerpiece. We would also build in a resilience hub there. We already have in place a couple co-ops that are relevant to climate change. We have already a community kitchen. We already have with our partners community gardens. So we're looking at leveraging the Center for Community Production to build the greenhouses and the like. So there's a lot of foundation we already have. Whether we get the grant or not, this work is moving forward. It would just move forward on a slower, at a slower pace. So I will stop there.
Thank you, Emily. Let's continue to scroll down. There's again our nodes all across the country, our beautiful logo. But I want to, before we bring everybody together, I really want to bring up this beautiful slides and the metaphor of the caterpillar to the butterfly. Because we know that a caterpillar's body, literally, when it forms the chrysalis, the body disintegrates inside it, and clusters of new cells called imaginal cells within the caterpillar who have a new vision for the organism itself, a vision that goes beyond the caterpillar, that goes beyond the chrysalis into imagining a butterfly. Those imaginal cells come together and they have the idea of the butterfly. But as those caterpillars, as those imaginal cells come together and one bumps up against another and says, oh, I'm a thorax, you're a thorax too, great, let's merge together. And another imaginal bumps up and says, oh, but I'm a wing. And the thorax cell says, oh, the wings are over on that side, and et cetera, et cetera. But y'all, as that happens, the caterpillar's immune cells, the immune system begins to attack them, referencing back what Blair had said earlier. But eventually they trigger new cell division, multiplying and combining, and literally the metamorphosis begins and the butterfly emerges and takes flight. And it's with that that I want to bring all of the representatives from the People's Network for Land and Liberation into a group conversation. And I want, again, we're sending love to Kali Akuno, who is slated to be with us. So we'll do our best to channel our dear friend and comrade. And I just want to invite folks to have a group conversation. Y'all, this is the first time that we've run through this slide deck. We're moving fast together, but I did want to just pause for a moment and ask if anybody heard anything from one another that you'd like to reflect on, knowing that we've got literally thousands of people who are going to hear these words or see this vision. Blair, I'm going to come to you first, and I'll just do it this way. I'm going to go, because I'm looking at the thing, and I know how, I'm going to go Blair, Michelle, Miki'ala, Emily, and Edget, just because that's how you appear on my screen. And Blair, with a specific note that folks were asking about what was being produced at the digital fabrication, and was it for resale or what? So I'm just going to literally invite each of you to say some words.
Yeah. So yeah, usually most of my presentation is about what digital fabrication is, what the technologies are, et cetera. However, this conversation, I wanted to kind of talk more about the implications and applications of it. But when I'm referring to technology, it's actually becoming a bit of a blur. So we're talking about computer control manufacturing at a small scale. So in one sense, you can kind of think of it as all of those automation technologies that displaced middle-class workers from their good jobs have now become cheap enough that middle-class workers can buy them themselves and gain that leverage in their own community in order to be able to produce the things that we need. So, I mean, that's one kind of vantage point on that. Another is that, you know, as everybody knows, 3D printers, you can buy them, you know, mail order for $100. That's one of an area of digital fabrication, but there are all sorts of tools that are customized to deal with different types of materials. And you know, it's all a combination of being able to digitally describe what you want and then working, you know, with the machine that can translate that digital code through some software into the actual kind of physical manifestation of it. There's also the reverse process, which is taking a physical object and scanning it so you have a 3D representation that you can then, you know, modify and do some other things with. And so part of that question then is, what useful can you do with that? Because anybody who's bought a 3D printer with the promise of making all your own stuff quickly realizes that that doesn't exactly do that. There are big 3D printers that take 4 people to operate and have a huge, you know, capital cost and the like that can do some pretty amazing things, but still it'd be cheaper to go to the hardware store, get a hacksaw and a welding torch and make it another kind of way for 90% of the stuff. Digital fabrication does, however, allow you, even with the existing technology, to make a very wide range of things, durable goods, you know, furniture, clothing, shoes, kayaks, bicycles, stuff that, you know, we use. I mean, we made a tiny cabin in our fab lab in Detroit, you know, net zero energy, code compliant, small housing structure, as a proof of concept. And we made it teeny so that some of the young folks who were involved with us in the project wouldn't get frightened off by this massive thing that they were building, but all of the tools and the techniques that were used were compliant with the building code, so it can easily be scaled up. So there's a wide range of things that you can make right now, but what is particularly interesting is that we're crossing the threshold of using the Fab Lab to make stuff to using the Fab Lab to make Fab Labs. And so since the Community Production Center or the Center for Community Production, depending upon whose version of this you're using, we're all on the same team though, we can make, you know, complex machinery, and that includes the machinery that we use to make stuff. And so using open source designs and, you know, collaborative techniques, we're building, I mean, this is a global kind of phenomenon. There's a couple thousand Fab Labs around the world, and I'm on the board of the Fab Foundation, which helps to kind of coordinate that. And there's a lot of programs where people are beginning to build the machines that can then build more machines. So you kind of get out of having to use supply chains that denigrate, you know, countries with precious metal extractions and, you know, all sorts of things in global supply chains. And you can begin, again, overlay your own ethical framework on what goes into the machine in the first place, but also we can customize the machine so that they can use the materials that we do have locally. So it's not dependent upon that. So we're transitioning into a phase where the answer to the question, what can you make with it, is changing radically, because we're making stuff that can make stuff. And we're tuning that process to use the materials that we think are ethically appropriate and to produce products that are non-disposable, that aren't throwaway, that can be recycled into the environment, or that can be deconstructed and reconstructed into other things. So we're not constantly throwing stuff, you know, away, the classic wherever away is. So we're talking about digital fabrication. It's not limited to 3D printing. There's a wide range of things, but that is an example. And we're talking about taking the technology in ways that allow us to use it at a local level and what's cost effective for us. Because what's interesting to industry is to create, you know, the old, what was it, Gillette razor blade things, you know, give away the razor and make your profit on razor blades indefinitely. I mean, lock-in is what everybody's looking for. And so we're going in the opposite direction. We want open designs, we want open supply chains, we want machines that can adapt to local materials so that you don't need this huge global supply chain to give you perfectly formed spools of plastic, which generated 10 times as much waste as each ounce of material that's in it, right? So that's a long-winded way of saying, yeah, right now we can build useful stuff, but what we're building is the basis for building extraordinarily useful stuff in a way that's actually in sync with us being an integrated part of our environment and not continuing to destroy and find greener pastures, which we're running out of.
Thanks, Blair. And again, I'm just going to go Michelle, Miki'ala, Emily, and Edget just to see if you've got anything to share as we continue to try to share with others what's being learned through this experiment.
I think the thing that I would like to highlight as it relates to this experiment is that, you know, the work that is being done at Incite Focus and also at Cooperation Jackson is very much like the inspiration and a pathway forward for some of our other nodes to be able to do this work. And I think that that's part of the essence of, you know, mutual support and collaboration. Yeah, I mean, without, you know, the PNLL framework and without being in community, you know, in active engagement and collaboration with those nodes, I don't know that Cooperation Vermont would ever be in position to be able to do what we're trying to do now. And if it were, we'd be so far behind the power curve on things that it might not even have an impact or be meaningful. So.
Miki'ala?
So why PNLL for us? You know, we're the newest, one of the newest nodes to PNLL, but we have been actively working on decolonizing economics, and this group have representatives that have been part of our evolutionary story. As we moved from project, I can see you wearing the necklace, David, awesome. As we moved from project-based work to really community development. And, you know, when you're looking at values, which just they're central to how we operate and what we do and unapologetically do. There's just such a match, and we're honored. And in our thinking, to be able to do this where we are is we're like an educational facility for others who want to learn this, because that's what's happened for us. We've learned so much from Eddleman, I love to call it Black Eden, Cooperation Jackson. I mean, just all of you are doing amazing work. So to be among you doing this work, because frankly, this is all that we want to do, is decolonize this. How can we live? How can we build the systems that we need? Honored to be here because, like Michelle said, we've learned so much and continue to learn. And that's part of you know, that 5-point plan is continual education, and I don't imagine that will stop. And we're deeply, deeply interested in so much of the work and how it can help us do the work here. And then, like the Kipuka, like those little islands of sanity, to be able to seed others trying to do this work as well.
Yeah, great. Let's see. One thing that I just want to underscore is, so this is coming out of various things that people said, but just underscore the value of people of self-provisioning, right? To the extent that people can individually or collectively produce goods and services to meet their own needs instead of necessarily purchasing it. I mean, that is as valuable as getting a raise, literally, right? And so I really think it's important in, you know, all of our work to lift that up, right? Because there's such a focus on jobs, and making jobs better. That's really important. But there is another way also of meeting livelihoods. And so that's another component that I really love about all of this. I guess I also want to mention that I think there's a hopefully a great viral impact of what we're doing. So in Massachusetts, there is a Greater Boston CLT network that maybe has 12 to 14 CLTs involved. There's a newly formed, you know, our valley, up and down the valley, there's a newly formed land and housing justice coalition, and there's efforts to connect up across the state. And so I certainly am talking about this model, like of a multifaceted community land trust. Usually it's either housing or agriculture. And so saying that it can connect up all these other practices, there's been a lot of enthusiasm about it. The last thing that I'll say is that there was a question about how supportive are local governments, local and state governments. I mean, I would say in Massachusetts, which is a very progressive state, there isn't a lot of support. Neither is there opposition, right? So the way that we talk about the work is like co-ops. There's no opposition. There's no pushback about worker co-ops from the powers that be, because we talk about workers co-owning and, like, you know, controlling, and that's fine, right? So we don't necessarily wave a post-capitalist flag. We do a lot of code switching, but all of these practices, when you talk about them and their basic values, it doesn't raise red flags. So there's not opposition, but we have a long road to go to really just do some education and build some champions. So lots of opportunity.
Thank you, Emily. What I was thinking about was how I think, you know, right now is a time for us to really, like, be bold in imagining what can be, and how, well, one, how we are going to survive the next period, and two, what can be. And it was so much easier to imagine these large possibilities in partnership and in relationship with other organizations and people, because on our own, you know, we're on our own. And I think, you know, just simple things like, it's fantastic that Incite Focus has this amazing production capacity, right? So they may have the digital printers, but what material are they going to use for producing anything, right? Now, if they had to try to solve that all by themselves, you know, that's a lot to take on. But if you know that in your network are people who grow bamboo or some other material that then can be used by them to make things, then, you know, it doesn't seem as daunting. So I think for me, being part of the network, just makes this whole idea that we can both, you know, provide for ourselves, survive the reactionary onslaught, and create a better future for everyone just seems much more possible when I'm doing it with powerful other organizations that are aligned. You know, in how we do the work, in our values, and in the future the decolonized future that we see for ourselves and all of our people.
Thank you so much, Edget, and all of you. And as the moderator of the panel and bringing you all together, one of the things that I want to, and I have the privilege of supporting the People's Net, every one of the nodes of the People's Network for Land and Liberation, and collectively trying to help provide the network itself nurture and grow. And I want to conclude our time with a couple of thoughts. One, with acknowledgement of Amilcar Cabral: mask no difficulties, tell no lies, claim no easy victories. The reality is that what we're sharing with you is our efforts to inspire you to try what we're doing, but I do not want to give you the illusion that this has been easy, that this in fact has been exceptionally hard, but we do it joyfully together, even as we do that hard work together. And again, and I think Emily really lifted this up, we all do it differently. Each one of these nodes is in an experiment, and it changes according to its local politics, its local conditions, its local moments. We're coming together to genuinely create a level of best practices and sharing with one another what we're learning. And that most certainly includes mistakes that we're making and sharing with one another the mistakes so that we can try to do it better. I also, in that same spirit of masking no difficulties, to be candid, like we are in crisis. I used to say that we were, and some of you who know me know that I used to talk about this as late stage capitalism, but y'all, this is end stage capitalism. This is it. Like we are at a moment, and I used to fuss back at people who tried to talk like this, but I can't help but to acknowledge a looming ecological crisis and collapse. It's not coming, it's here and getting worse. Capitalism itself, its inherent contradictions are coming crashing around us. There's just no way that capitalism can't solve this crisis or can't be reformed, because capitalism is the economic crisis. And we have to have the courage and, in Edget's words, the boldness to actually say it out loud that we need a completely new system. And fascism is rising because so many people understand that systems are failing. And fascism is not merely when cops kill Black and brown people. That's horrific. That is absolutely racist and white supremacist. And yes, that's a version of fascism. But fascism, properly understood, needs a populace behind it, right? And what we're seeing is the return of not just Jim Crow segregation, but we're seeing an explicit return to a level of brutality and it's going to get worse. And so we're trying to do this, y'all. We are building lifeboats of survival in our local communities, but we intend to operate those lifeboats like pirates, not like members of Her Royal Majesty's Navy. Empire is part of the problem, so imperial lifeboats won't work for us. We're building pirate boats, and we're going to confederate those pirate boats and build supply and value chains for one another. We're going to protect each other. We're going to defend each other. We are here for each other, and we have to be, because we've all we've got. Nobody's coming for us. We need each other. And I am so grateful to all of the people that I'm looking at on the screen who have taught me, who have worked with me. And I want to thank each and every one of you as individuals. And I want to say, y'all, the People's Network for Land and Liberation is trying to share with you what we're learning. We want to learn from you. We are coming to the end, and I just want to invite anyone on this screen with me if you've got any final words, because I know I was getting a little emotional there, and sometimes my emotional state gets wrapped up. So I want to give somebody else an opportunity for final thoughts.
Yeah, well, maybe to change gears for a split second. There's a quip in the digital fabrication community that, for example, computer science is one of the worst things that ever happened to computers and to science, in that it created this false abstraction of what computing was about. And we've been laboring under this very inefficient process. Nature computes all the time at a molecular level, but we came up with this concept, man-made concept of what a computer is. And then we use 1,000 times more materials than we need to build that artificial concept. And then we try to use that. Capitalism is about the worst thing that happened to capital or process, which is kind of what ism is. I think there's a parallel. And so we've got this false construct about the way things need to work in order to be effective and efficient. And I think in the same way in digital fabrication, we're kind of blowing through these made up models and looking at how nature does this and abstract it and work with it differently. You talk about right relationships with nature. I think, deconstructing, decommodifying capitalism is a part of that process also. I mean, it's an interesting made up concept. But I think if you kind of peer through it, there's some more fundamental ways that we are learning that are modeled in nature that allow us to be in right relationship with each other economically and in every other way. So I would also kind of quickly mention that, one of the amazing things about this group is, you bring a tool like digital fabrication and everybody here immediately says, yes, I need this. I've been trying to do this. I need a more efficient way to do it and go forward, because they've been trying to change the way we live. For a lot of people, that's not the case. And so it's wonderful to be in community with folks that when you raise something up and say, here's a new idea, they said, again, this is something that is a critical ingredient. We've been doing this inefficiently. Let's take the best pieces from everybody, let's experiment with it and share it back out to everybody else. That, is part of what Edget was saying also. I mean, that makes life so much easier, and it makes a process have so much less friction in getting things done.
I wanted to say yes to that, all of that. And also someone said something about, lots of workers are looking for different answers. How do we get involved and that sort of thing? And I would say, first of all, listen and watch all the decolonizing economic summit sessions, because there's so much wealth and learning there. The other thing that I would say is, you, depending on your comfort level, maybe you want to do something like convert a conventional business into a worker cooperative, or maybe you want to do something like what we're doing. But that at the basis of all of that, it's really about relationship. And I would say, do that at home. Where are you? Find those people, find your people. I mean, I was thinking about this morning. You're all my people until you're not. Be nice, people, but you're all my people because you're here, because you're searching, you're yearning, like all of us did at some point. Like, what can we do? And there's so much that we can do. And it starts at home, and it starts by finding your people, and it's about relationship over everything else. Really will help you find your people to do the work where you are and proliferate like a Calgon commercial.
And if I could have 5 seconds, there was a question about what have you learned so far about working in this network? So I just want to say this is unbelievably, mind-blowingly great process and relationships, and just so productive and positive, and struggles and disagreements, but also incredibly fruitful. So yeah, we're learning and making the road as we travel, but it's been a great, fantastic, unbelievably wonderful journey so far.
Can I say one more thing? Look,
Yes.
even though capitalism is dissolving around us, it still permeates everything that we know. So like, just be forgiving. Edget said it, you know, like we make, or many people said it, we make mistakes, we reiterate, we do it again. I mean, it's just, that's just the nature of it. The system is not there for us. We're building it. So I'm just saying, you could do it. You're probably already doing it. So.
Edget, Michelle, any final thoughts before we close it out?
The thing that's been kind of going through my mind is actually something that I was perspective that was shared by the other co-director for Native Roots Network when we were in this study group together, that was liberation theory for the end of the world, decolonization, pyrocommunism, the hidden legacies of post-apocalyptic survival and resistance. And you know, many of us in that study group, you know, very much on the forethought of our perspectives around like the current climate crisis and the current rise in fascism, and like, you know, the pervasiveness of genocides, Palestine and elsewhere, that are happening on our planet right now. And he offered this, you know, really important perspective that he was like, for us, the climate collapse and the genocide started 500 years ago. And so it's like, not welcome to the party, but also some perspective in that the thing that we really have to hone in on and hold on to is, you know, our humanity's innate ability to thrive and adapt. And that's what we're doing.
Edget, you'll have the final word.
Well, I saw this question in the chat pop up. There's little place here for resistance, struggle, and movements of confronting oppression, or is there? Absolutely, there is, because, well, we don't have any choice. But I think that we focus on the building the capacity to serve, you know, to provide for ourselves is in part resistance. And in terms of confronting oppressions, that's something that we can do, you know, collectively, but that requires a great deal of trust and relationship building and practice in action. You're not going to wake up tomorrow and fight the state if you haven't been able to coordinate yourselves into, you know, making something, or, you know, creating a minor supply chain. So everything goes back to building relationships, aligned values, and clarity of vision, bold, clear vision. And I think with that, we have a chance at confronting the oppressions.
Thank you all so much. And thank you, not only our panelists, but those of you who are listening to us on KMUD, those of you who are watching us live, and those of you who are watching the video. Remember, folks, to, in between this incredible session, drink water, get up, walk, stretch. We have a short break before our next session. We'll come back at 1 o'clock Pacific, 4 o'clock Eastern for Decolonizing Restoration and Traditional Ecological Knowledge, brought to us by Ali Metters-Knight, Mel Figueroa, Phil Abers, Brooke Thompson, and perhaps others. Love to all.